Saying nobody's at school today. Why? What am I doing? All right, hey, put your phone up for me and be serious for me for a second. I'm going to tell you this day in history, kind of something really close and personal to me personally. April, and this is going to be our advisory for today. I'm teaching you about this day in history. April 19th, 1995, what happened was that a federal building in Oklahoma City was attacked and blown up by an American terrorist named Timothy Mcvay. I was in first grade at that time, and it connects with my family's personal story because my dad was 2 blocks south of the building when it happened. He was on the non-blast side, so the far side of that building, 2 blocks south, on this day at that time. What happened, I'm going to give you the brief version of the story since we got a few minutes here in advisory, and then I got a particular video I'll show you, kind of shows you a little bit more than I can tell you. And what I hope to bring to you is just a little bit of learning that you probably don't get in Georgia. In Oklahoma, it's kind of woven into the fabric of Oklahoma City. It'll be talked about today in schools. Today is the 27th anniversary of when this happened. So I was in first grade at the time. People my age remember it being from when they were young. Obviously, a lot of students in school today weren't even born when it happened. So it's kind of important to teach the next generation about what happened, why it happened, and some lessons learned, some things that we can learn that come from it. So what happened on that day is that a man named Timothy Mcvay drove a moving van, like a Ryder box truck. You know, the yellow big trucks. U-Haul is one company and Ryder is another company. So he drove this moving van full of explosives right up next to this building. This is a federal building, which means it housed a whole bunch of federal agencies. Social Security, there was a military recruiting agency, so there were service members in the building. Federal Aviation Administration, a bunch of federal agencies. Federal represents the government, and he hated the government. He was anti-government. What he was hoping to do, this is crazy, what he was hoping to do was start a war against the government. He was hoping that he would start a grassroots war against the government, that his first bomb would inspire other people to rise up, take up arms against the government, take down the federal government. He's a little deluded, okay? You can disagree with certain things that happen in our government, but you don't need to go attack a building full of innocent people in order to make a point, right? Don't we have other ways in America to try to have our voices heard? Super tragically, in this building, there was a daycare on the second floor. They actually parked the truck right next to the daycare, the portion of the building that was the daycare. And because of that, 19 children were killed as well. So my personal story is that this is the Swansons in 1995. That's me, lower right. I got a third brother. Well, there's three of us. I got a youngest brother. He's not in this picture because at that time in 1995, my mom was pregnant with my youngest brother. And on that day, this picture's not from that day, but it's pretty close. You know, it's that time period. On that day, my mom was going to go have her ultrasound on the baby in her belly. We're going to find out what the gender was, boy or girl. So it's kind of an exciting day. I stayed home from school because of that, because I was going to go to the ultrasound. And what I remember is that my mom and my dad were on the phone with each other in the morning. 8:55 or so, they get on the phone with each other. Really hard for us to understand is that back then there weren't cell phones, there wasn't Google Maps, there wasn't Google Directions. You had to actually call each other and say, hey, our appointment's at 11 o'clock. It's at this office. I'll meet you at the Burger King. You had to actually make a plan. You couldn't just text each other and change your plan on the fly or something like that. So they were on the phone. They were kind of talking about what they were going to do for that day when we were going to meet each other at the doctor's office. And 8:55, 8:58, 9 o'clock, 9:01, 9:02 is when my mom heard the blast. 9:02 is when the bomb went off, and the scenes that come afterwards look much like this. Half the building was blown up instantly. And what my mom remembers hearing is the blast on the phone. She heard the blast. The line stayed open, and then she started to hear screaming in the background. She heard my dad's voice. He was trying to help people get out of his office. He was saying, where's so-and-so? And like, let's get out. So she heard all that happening. And as you might imagine, she was worried. She was frantic about what is going on. I don't understand. She stayed on the line for 8 minutes. And back then, 1995, there's this thing called call waiting, where if you got another call on your same line, it would go beep, beep. Now, these days, I know you guys are on your phone and you're FaceTiming and you're Snapchatting, you're doing everything all at once. And if you get another call, you just click over to it, whatever. Well, back then, you didn't know if there was another call except for the beep, beep. So she stays on the line. She don't want to hang up. She doesn't know if she'd ever get back on the line. And 8 minutes later, she hears the beep, beep. So she clicks over. I think you had to hit the star button. She clicks over. It's my dad. He had found another phone, a landline. He called and he said, Carol, I don't know what happened. It's crazy down here. It's chaos down here. I'm okay. I'm trying to help my other people get out, and I'll call you when I can. I'm okay, but I'll call you when I can. So they hung up at that time, and we went straight to the TV screens. I remember as a first grader going to the side bedroom TV, turning on the local news, and the news helicopters, they got there pretty fast, right? They had heard the blast as well. They knew something had happened. So the news helicopters pretty much started showing this scene live on the TV right as we turned it on. So we could see what was happening downtown, and we knew that this was pretty close to where my dad was as well. So we're watching it unfold on TV. This is what I remember about April 19th, 1995. That is 27 years ago today. So this day in history, Timothy Mcvay attacked the Oklahoma City Federal Building. And in total, we can talk about history. We can talk about what's in a textbook. We can memorize things on a test. I know so much of your school is about what's going to be on the test. I want us to never forget that there were real people involved. In that building on that day, 168 people were killed. Men, women, and 19 children were killed in the building on that day from that bomb. One of the people who was killed was a rescue worker. She was not in the building, but she came to help, and she was struck with falling debris, hit her in the head, and she died because she came to help. So in total, 168 people were killed in that building on that day. Let's always remember that there's people involved. And, social studies students, history students, we talk a lot about wars, talk about thousands of people killed, talk about, their numbers, their statistics. Let's never forget that they're real people. They have families. They are husbands and wives, sons and daughters, fathers and mothers. Let's never forget that. And these are the faces of the 168 who were killed. In Oklahoma City, the city remembers every year on this time, on this day, pretty much at this time. It's 8:45 a.m. in Oklahoma City right now. So at 9:02, about 20 minutes from now, there will be 168 seconds of silence all across Oklahoma City. 1 second for every person who was killed. It's a pretty important time in Oklahoma City. So I know that in Georgia, you guys don't. It's kind of not a part of our history here in Georgia. It's not something maybe you heard about. I told this story in depth last year to one of my world history classes because it is world history. This is a part of world history, and it kind of shaped how we think about our country, domestic terrorism, protection, federal government. It's a big part of world history, the fact that this building got attacked in Oklahoma City. So I shared it in my world history class, and when I was done telling about it, my students were very engaged. They were into it. I showed a lot of pictures, a couple videos. I had one student say something that I'll never forget. She said, "How come no one has ever told me about this before?" So I have made it my commitment to myself. I always want to share about the Oklahoma City bombing. Even if I can't do a full class presentation on it, I want to tell you as much as I can about the Oklahoma City bombing. A little bit more about my family story on that day. I told you there were 168 people who were killed. Well, gracefully, mercifully, we don't understand how God works. Why did some people die and others didn't? But my dad was not hurt on that day because of the circumstances in that moment. He was on the phone, and he was Mr. Cool Guy at the time. He's a young professional. He's chief of staff in his office. He had his feet propped up on his desk, and he was kicked back, both feet propped up on his desk, talking to my mom on the phone. And the blast came from behind him, so the energy of the blast threw him across his desk, across his whole office. Because he had his feet up, he kind of flew across the room. Well, from behind him comes crashing his window pane. Very heavy steel window pane fell onto his desk. And if he had been sitting at his desk like a normal person, he probably would not have flown across the room, and he may have been crushed by that window pane coming down on top of him. But because he had his feet up, because he was on the phone, he flew across the room, and he was not injured, much less killed on that day. So that's part of my family's personal story, personal history. What I'm going to do now, I'm going to show you a video. It's going to tell you some more of the details in about 6 minutes. It's a really good video. If you have any questions on the back side, I'd be happy to answer them, and I'll just kind of round it out, and that'll be our advisory for today.
On April 19, 1995, Timothy Mcvay, an American Gulf War veteran, shocked America when he committed what was at that time the most devastating terrorist attack on American soil. This is the story of the Oklahoma City bombing. On April 19, 1995, a railroad truck filled with homemade explosives detonated outside the Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building in Oklahoma City. The blast caused catastrophic damage, leaving 168 people dead and hundreds more injured. The question on nearly everyone's mind was, why? What motive could someone have to blow up a building, and one that included a daycare center? Two men, Timothy Mcvay and Terry Nichols, were ultimately held responsible for the bombing at Oklahoma City. Both Mcvay and Nichols served in the military and met in basic training at Fort Benning in 1988. That same year, Mcvay became a candidate for the Special Forces, but dropped out after just 2 days. He later reunited with Nichols. They bonded over their mutual anti-government sentiments. Mcvay's distrust of the government began in high school. As a teenager, he read the Turner Diaries by William Pierce, the leader of one of America's most prominent neo-Nazi organizations at the time. The book outlines a fictional Aryan revolution against the federal government, and its opening scene is eerily similar to the Oklahoma City bombing. A truck exploding outside a government building. By 1994, Mcvay and Nichols' hatred and distrust of the government have been further fueled by events like the FBI assault on the Branch Davidian compound, home to a religious cult in Waco, Texas. In September of 1994, Mcvay and Nichols began plotting to destroy a federal symbol. They chose the Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building in downtown Oklahoma City. On the morning of April 19, 1995, Mcvay parked a rental truck filled with homemade explosives outside the Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building. At 9:02 a.m., he detonated the bomb. The blast destroyed nearly half of the building, collapsing its entire north wall. It also left a 16-block radius of destruction. Nearly 300 buildings in the immediate area were damaged, including the Journal Record building 5 blocks away. 25 buildings were completely destroyed. 850 people were injured, many in the surrounding area, including 39 people at the Water Resources Board building 1 block north of the explosion. 168 people were killed, 19 were children. More than a third of the population of Oklahoma City knew someone who was a victim of the attack. For an attack on a scale America had never before seen, it required a response that was perhaps never thought needed. In the aftermath, 12,384 people volunteered in rescue and recovery efforts. 16 different organizations, ranging from FEMA to the IRS, established volunteer areas at the Recovery Service Center. From every corner of America, people responded, said Larry Mackey, the lawyer for the prosecution. Rescuers from across this country descended on Oklahoma City. Literally hundreds and hundreds of law enforcement officers got in their cars, caught planes, and headed to downtown Oklahoma City. America was in shock. People needed help. Mcvay and Nichols were arrested. In the summer of 1997, Mcvay was tried and convicted on 11 different counts and sentenced to death. He was executed by lethal injection on June 11, 2001. Nichols was found guilty on 1 count of conspiracy and 8 counts of involuntary manslaughter. He was sentenced to life in prison. In 2004, he was tried again on state charges in Oklahoma and convicted of 161 counts of first-degree murder, including fetal homicide. He received 161 consecutive life terms in prison. Today, the Oklahoma National Memorial Museum honors those who lost their lives.
That's the location today. That's the memorial that's in Oklahoma City at this time.
Even decades later, Americans still try to find rationale and reason, an explanation for acts of senseless terror, and hope that they will never happen again.
All right. So that's this day in history. That's something that you can think about, reflect on, maybe take it home and share with your families. Hey, we talked about this today. Mom, Dad, what do you remember about that time? First block, I have a co-teacher in here, Miss Rozier, shared what she remembers on that day. So it is something that impacted the whole world. You guys are young and don't remember it, and I kind of commit to teaching it because it's a story that deserves to be told. What I really liked about the video, kind of how it kind of broke it down, there's the men responsible. They're part of the story, but we don't need to talk about them all that much. We need to understand their motivations, but they're not the center stage. There's the bombing itself. It's kind of the what and the how it happened. But then the third part of that video was called The Aftermath, and it talked about the response. The shirt I'm wearing today says Oklahoma Standard. It's actually got the logo for the museum, the memorial and museum. It says service, honor, and kindness. The Oklahoma Standard is what was established in the aftermath. The way that Oklahomans rallied around themselves, the way that the country rallied around Oklahoma, and the way that the world rallied around the disaster response efforts was really amazing. And the Oklahoma Standard refers to this is how it's supposed to be done. The way that multiple agencies came in to help, the way that they were received by Oklahomans kindly, graciously, respectfully, gratefully. This is called the Oklahoma Standard. There's a story told by the governor of Oklahoma at the time. He says he tells a story like this. He was in a room with some disaster relief workers. People came from all over the world. It's hard to imagine how many people flowed into Oklahoma City to help out. Nevada, Arizona, especially those with experience based off of kind of pulling people out of forest fires and stuff like that. There were a lot of urban disaster relief teams that came in to help. And the governor was sitting with a group of them just saying thank you, saying appreciate you coming here. He's just expressing his gratitude. And a man in the crowd stood up and he held up $1. And he says, Mr. Governor, do you know what this is? And the governor said, I don't know, tell me. He said, this is an Oklahoma dollar. This is $1 I came here with in my pocket, and I have not been able to spend it. I can't buy a cup of coffee. I can't buy a meal. I can't buy a haircut. Everything I needed has been provided. The way Oklahomans has received us has been amazing. Thank you. So Oklahoma dollars is kind of to say that they didn't have to spend a dime out of their own pocket. Oklahomans received them gratefully and cared for the disaster relief workers who came in. So the Oklahoma Standard is considered how we're supposed to respond to disaster relief even to today. Obviously, we didn't know it at the time, but 6 years later, 2001, September 11th would happen. And at that time, Oklahoma City would get to go rally and help New York City, kind of a sister city in disaster at that time. So Oklahoma Standard just refers to service and honor and kindness and all those good attributes that came in the aftermath of the bombing. The bombing was bad, but the way that Oklahoma City rallied was really it's a special story. And even to this day, the city continues to grow. You saw the memorial. Now it's actually a national memorial. It's part of the national park system. There's a beautiful museum there that tells the story very well. A lot of artifacts. History nerd like myself really takes in all the artifacts in the museum. If you ever get to go to Oklahoma City, I would strongly encourage you to go and visit. Make that a part of your time passing through Oklahoma City. The memorial part itself, you saw that on the video. Each of these 168 individuals is represented by a chair. And the chair kind of has a nice opaque glass that when it gets lit up at night, it almost looks like the chair is floating. There's adult-sized chairs, but then there's also 19 child-sized chairs, and it kind of just makes you choke up a little bit when you see the smaller chair and you know that it represents a child who died. And then one more thing the city has done to bounce back is 2001, they started the first ever Oklahoma City Memorial Marathon. And you know, a marathon is it's an effort, it's a struggle. If you're going to run 26.2 miles, whether you're in shape or not in shape, it's going to be a struggle, right? You got to battle through those miles. So marathon is a really fitting representation of the city of survivors. And I've been able to participate in the marathon several times. This is just one of the handful of medals. I got a couple medals hanging over there. But it's really grown. The marathon event has really grown. It started off with a couple thousand in the first event. But these days, there's over 40,000 people who participate, everything from a kid's run and a 5K all the way up to the full marathon. So really just represents overcoming, represents how the city has rallied and grown stronger amidst the difficulty and the adversity of the Oklahoma City bombing. So that is this day in history, April 19th, 1995, kind of really personal to me and my family. I'll show you one more thing here. I'll pass it around. Two more things, actually. This is a cap that's from the Oklahoma City Fire Department, and it says Oklahoma City Fire. This to me represents the good guys, right? This is a logo I remember from being a first grader. The heroes wore this hat. So Oklahoma City firefighters wore this hat, and I got a replica hat, so I'm going to wear that to honor them today right now. And then this right here, this is actually a piece of granite that comes from the building. My dad was able to get this because of how close he was to the building. In the aftermath, he didn't pick it up on that day, but in the aftermath, there's a lot of rubble, and some people were able to take home kind of just to remember what happened, right? It's not a souvenir, but it's to remember what happened. So this is an actual piece from the building itself. I can click back to that picture, a piece from the building itself, and I'll just pass this around briefly, let you pass it along. I know the bell's about to ring, but if you want to connect with history and the artifact, this is a piece from the Oklahoma City Murrah building itself. So I hope you know more than when you walked in the room. I hope you'll take some time to reflect, pause, honor, and just understand what happened in Oklahoma City and how you can become stronger because of it. Thank you for your time and attention, like always. All right, I know that was a fast advisory.